All right. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is attorney Dan Wynn with the Intentional Entrepreneur Podcast. I have a very special guest with me today, a seasoned attorney, has represented clients throughout all phases of litigation during her 20 years of practice. She's done state court, federal court, family court, bankruptcy court, criminal court, small claims court, administrative tribunals, worker compensation court, probably the basketball court and tennis court. Um, and probate court. So I want to welcome a very special person today, Shannon. Should I go Shannon Parks?
Shannon Lamb.
Shannon Lamb. Sorry. All right. Thank you again for showing up today. We're going to discuss this article in a little bit, but when you sent it to me, I thought this is a fantastic discussion to have, because I think for the most part, most business owners looking to actively avoid litigation, which is this article. Before we kind of get into all of that, I want to ask you a little bit about your background, how you became an attorney, and what kind of attracted you to pre-litigation, or maybe just litigation in general, to helping your clients.
Well, I decided to become an attorney when I was involved in a car accident. I was a sophomore in college, and I was a passenger in a car that was rear-ended, ended up as my own attorney. My attorney decided to enter into a settlement on my behalf, and so I ended up advocating for myself and resolving the case. But I was also really angry about having gone through the experience. Really from start to finish, I was a number, not a person to the attorney. The chiropractors that she sent me to ended up sending me to collections because they had such a bad relationship with her. Of course, entering into a settlement on my behalf without my permission. So I ended up resolving the case. I had to make 2 court appearances as my own attorney. My voice was so high pitched and so nervous, and it was insane. I was able to get it resolved successfully, and the attorney was unable to take any fee as a result of what transpired. So, but it made me mad. I was 18 at the time, and it seemed to me that I had a reasonable amount of intelligence, but I really didn't understand the system, and nobody was doing a very good job of explaining it to me. And so at that point, I decided to become an attorney, and much to my mother's chagrin. So fast forward to my desire to engage in pre-litigation work and to keep people out of my office. Before the pandemic, in summer 2019, probably spent about 90 hours that summer hanging out in the courtroom, and none of those were for trial. Those were just for law and motion appearances and for trial setting conferences, and the judges were angry. And they wanted me to go back and tell all my friends about it, and to tell my clients, and to have them tell their friends about it. And it was so wasteful. And of course, at that time, we were all 50 deep in person in the courtroom, listening to the same thing. And a lot of us, like, I live in Orange County, and if I had to be in the courtroom in Los Angeles, it was at 8:30 in the morning. And what a waste of time. What a waste of time and money, of course. And you can't really explain or describe that experience sitting in the courtroom. In fact, in retrospect, I think I need to have my clients attend some of those conferences so that they can understand just how angry the judges are. And of course, now, 2 years later, 3 years later, we're now at a point where the courts are even more stressed and the judges are even more angry, and they just want everybody to work it out. They don't care if you tried to work it out. They don't care if you've really been wronged. They just care that you're using up these resources, and they don't have trial dates until late next year at the soonest. So it's a bad situation. Compounding that is the cost. A lot of these disputes are not disputes that can be covered by insurance. Breach of contract disputes, partnership disputes, these things can get ugly very, very quickly, and there isn't really a safety mechanism for a business owner to deal with those issues. So what ends up happening is now they're injected into this system that already was very costly, and now there's no resolution. It's just this ongoing horrific process, and there's just now mediation is often a resolution now, but everybody is running to the retired judges for help because the court system is so overloaded. I mean, it just ground to a halt in 2020, and it has very slowly recovered since. But yeah, it's ugly. It's ugly.
Yeah, and maybe you can shed a little bit of light on this particular. And I'm sure you get this. Is like I want to go after them. It's not about the money. It's about the principle.
Oh, yes. It's all about the principle until you get the first invoice. And then you realize like and so in the article, I think there's a discussion about the average cost of litigation, which is about $75,000 for a sort of garden variety business litigation case up to the time of trial. If you have somebody who's cooperating on the other side. But often in these cases, yeah, it's not about because you've got somebody on the other side, even if it's not you, that says it's about the principle. And it's not about the money, and they want to pay the lawyer to bury the other guy, and
Mm-hmm.
it just becomes this never ending situation that doesn't usually resolve well for either of the parties. Um, yeah. So, and I think the key to avoiding that situation is preventing that from happening in the first place. One of the things that I often like to say to my family and my friends when they're signing a contract is to pretend that they hate the other person the next week. You read this again, tell me what you think when you're angry with this person. How does the court help you? And what does that mean? That's great
Mm-hmm.
that you have rights, and it's great that you're putting them on notice of those rights, but what does that really mean? What's that going to
Yeah.
cost you? What are you going to get back? And nobody seems to know or understand that. So understanding
Yeah.
that at the beginning is what I'm hoping for.
Right, right. And it's all kind of like sunshines and roses when they're signing usually it's a business deal, right? So they're going into business. They're going to get some large benefit or relatively large benefit out of the contract. But you're absolutely right. Like, how do you, if you hate them next week, would you still sign that? I'm actually reading this book called How to Decide, and um, it's by Annie Duke. She's actually a professional poker player, but she consults high CEOs on how to make these decisions. And I just started it, but it's a really good way to kind of have some retrospective, right? And one of the things she says is, hey, we have some like confirmation bias because if there's a good outcome, we assume that it was a good decision at that time, but that's kind of a faulty way to look at it because you didn't have the same information at the time you
Mm-hmm.
entered into the contract. So, kind of along those lines, it's a great book. If you're listening to this, pick it up. I'm enjoying it so far. Just another point, you mentioned about you going to the courtrooms. Kind of a funny story. When I finished school and between the time results are coming out and and after we took the test, a classmate of mine were like, "Hey, let's just go to the courthouse and let's sit in on some court proceedings so we can get familiar with things like that." So we do that. We did that a couple of times, and then one day we said, "All right, let's go. All right, let's go get some lunch first." All right, so we get some lunch, and then we said, hey, let's just go bowling for today and skip skip out on this. So we went bowling instead of going to the courthouse. And so we always joke about he's actually a workers' comp judge now. But we kind of joke about our days is like, oh, when we're so green behind the ear, we are so eager to learn about the law, and then
Mhm.
just like one day we decided, all right, let's go bowling. But the reason why we're chatting today is, again, you wrote this fantastic article about 8 ways to avoid litigation, and in my practice, I don't do any litigation. I used to do this before. I understand why some people like litigation. I did it for a while, but you said 8:30 LA. I used to drive up 8:30 LA, go to these CMCs for like 2 minutes. I could get my way up
Mhm.
Van Nuys all the way up to the valley,
Yep.
and I was like, dude, my life is too short to be to do. Not just that is, you at the mercy of the calendar, and
Yes.
you're dealing with. So for me, it wasn't all right. I know some people they love it, and so kind of different strokes for different folks. But I deal with primarily my clients are businesses and business owners. I don't, I do advise them. Hey, I don't handle litigation, but I think this is a great conversation to, and you pointed out you can't completely avoid litigation, but there are 8 things that you say that you can do to maybe reduce the possibility of litigation. And so we'll post the link to the article in the show notes. But if we can kind of go down this list and maybe you share a little bit more about your experience, you know, helping to avoid litigation.
Absolutely. Um, Well, the first thing that's on the list, and I appreciate that you raised the issue that you can't completely avoid it. There's nothing that you can do to 100% of the time eliminate all of the jagwagons out of your life. There are people who are going to feel that they've been wronged and are going to uh, feel that it is important for them to press their point regardless. But I believe that if you do these things, then you are going to dramatically decrease your possibility and likelihood of being sued. So the first is to be nice. And I think that really extends to all things, not just what you do professionally. In fact, I believe that's how you and I first met about 11 years ago. You were being nice to me, but having the community and I guess the sense and understanding that you're going to meet these people that you're encountering again in your community. That's one of the great things about practicing law in Orange County locally, I believe, is that everybody is, for the most part, really collegial and just interested in trying to work it out and doing business with one another and um, seeking people who share similar philosophies and when you're a new business owner, that's harder than when you've been around for a little while and you have the ability to understand when it's a love connection and when it's not. Um, but trying to avoid conflicts before they start, and I think often putting yourself in the other person's perspective goes a long way. Um, uh, Gather and organize all of the information, the good, the bad, the ugly. Again, I think this is a good lifestyle suggestion and not just for professional purposes. But when you have all of the information that is associated with a particular contract or file or issue, it makes it so much better for you to understand where you are. If you have 20 documents and they're in 20 different places and you have given none of them to the people whom you're asking for help, there's no way that you can really understand what your problem is. Your problem, a business owner's problem, or a personal
Hmm.
problem, usually does exist in 20 places and needs to be gathered somewhere so it can be synthesized and evaluated in the bigger picture so that a holistic approach can be applied. But if you don't have the photographs or the agreement or the letters or the text messages or whatever it happens happens to be that uh, is involved in the controversy, then it's going to be very difficult to solve the problem. Similarly, if you don't have all of your documentation and you're only giving some of it to your lawyer, you're probably going to end up in trouble. That's going to cause some
Yeah. The,
some some difficulty later on when the other person responds and says, "Wait a second, that's not quite how it happened."
yeah. A, there's an old episode of The Simpsons that if you, I used to watch a lot of it, and the kind of the main attorney there was Lionel Hutz. He's actually was played by Phil Hartman, and there's a scene
Yes.
where like he's representing a French chef, and there's a lawsuit against the French chef for or there's a dispute, and the other attorney, the opposing side says, "Hey, you're not you're not really from America, are you?" And the jury goes satirical, right? Their jury's like, oh no. And then Lionel Hutz goes to his clients, like, you tell me everything from now on. But you could tell, right? He's got a huge accent, French accent, but it just kind of goes to show. It illustrates the point is like, yeah, you got to be really truthful with your attorney, good, bad, because you know, the, you don't want to be blinded at the worst possible time, um, as the
Absolutely
attorney
not. Well,
to certain information.
right, right. And I can't do my job if I don't have everything available to me. If I'm missing some of those cards, it's kind of difficult to figure out, okay, well, what kind of hand do I have? I'm going to have to go and find that clip. That's
Right.
hilarious. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And go
along
ahead.
those lines, being prepared, if you are organized, I think being prepared naturally follows. It goes along with thinking about your business and thinking about your situation in a broader sense, making sure that your employees have what they need, or if you're the only employee, that you have what you
Mhm,
need, making sure that you have
mhm,
good people representing you. And again, at the outset
mhm,
of selecting who's the ambassador for your company, figuring out if that's a good fit, if that's somebody who is going to be concerned
right,
about
right.
injuries on the workplace, or about
Mhm,
what might happen if they don't report something properly. So making sure that the employees are trained to spot and investigate issues appropriately. That's a huge issue that
mhm,
I find, is that you have people
mhm,
who are charged with the responsibility for doing certain things, but for whatever reason don't do their job well, and it ends up falling on the business owner, and exposes them to a lot of liability when
mhm,
the people that they've hired haven't done their job, or who are actively interfering with the employer's business. So at the outset,
yeah,
yeah, making
yeah.
sure there are
That's a
good
really good point,
handbooks.
because I was reading somewhere, it makes sense. Is you that particular company, they hired for cultural fit rather than competence. I mean, obviously there's minimum competency, right? But for them, it was how did they fit culturally with the particular company? Did
Hmm.
um,
Yes.
would they be able to get along with the other people, their other teammates? And so I think it's kind of an often um, underutilized or underestimated feature, because when the stuff hits the fan, you want someone who would make the right decision, right? And not that's not
Absolutely.
always based on skill. Sometimes it's just based on integrity, and
Right.
you can't always teach
And
that.
having the care about the employee, or employer, absolutely. But you can teach some of those competencies. You can have training in some technical
Mhm.
skills, but yeah, you can't teach somebody how to care about the work that their employer is doing. That's a fantastic point. And yeah,
Hmm.
having that good cultural fit is, I think it's key. It's everything. If you,
Hmm.
especially if you have unsupervised employees, if you have people who are maybe out
Hmm.
cleaning something, or are subcontractors working in construction, if you have
Hmm.
somebody who's not
Yeah,
always
you
being,
have to.
definitely need to make sure that person understands and is able to execute your company's philosophy. Otherwise, yeah, you could get yourself into a lot of trouble. Yeah, and that's usually the weak point, whether it be a property management company, or, I mean, the list goes on and on. It's usually some employee of a company that
Mhm.
has perhaps deviated from where they should be, and it causes trouble. So again, maybe don't pretend like you're going to
Right.
hate the employee when you hire them next week, but sort of along those same lines. I mean, you want to look at them as
Right.
in more, I think, of a critical fashion, and maybe look to
Hmm.
onboard them in a way, yeah, that assures that they have similar company culture and you have that good fit.
Right. Right.
So
So,
yeah,
we talked just about working with the right people. And I think the next thing, now, now entering into those right agreements for your business.
absolutely. And making sure that you are, hiring somebody like you, Dan, to make sure that the company is formed properly, to make sure that the foundation
Hmm.
is where it needs to be. Making sure that you understand, as a business owner, um, the purpose of the agreements and what the outcome of them actually is. One of the things that I have encountered the most frequently is, and probably 85% of the cases that I've ever worked on as a lawyer involve the absence of a contract or a poorly written contract, because the other 15 don't usually end up being at issue. But you have these agreements that come in, if you do have an agreement, and they're sort of these caricatures of what a contract is. It's maybe there is some familiarity or experience with the contracting process for one reason or another, or maybe there's great familiarity in contracting for one area, maybe a service contract, but the agreement involves a product for goods. And so you have terminology that's
Hmm.
used that isn't usually appropriate, or you have the exclusion of certain terms that should be in the agreement that um, eh, haven't even been considered, because they're looking at old agreements. They're trying to mimic what they think an
Hmm.
agreement should look like, rather than consult an attorney to get it formed properly in the first place. Making sure that you've considered having an attorney's fees clause. That cuts both ways, but that's definitely something
Right.
that should be considered, um, especially if you have frequent dealings with somebody. That may be something where you say, okay,
Hmm.
let's look at this. Let's figure out how this practically works, and see if we can accomplish this, um, in a streamlined way. Yeah, there a lot of it is,
Hmm.
hey, my lawyer wanted me to send you this agreement, so I'm sending this to you, and will you sign it? And then the agreements are signed, and there's not really any negotiation or discussion. Um, so that's an important part too. Going back
Right.
to your earlier point, people, that's the set point. People want to be agreeable. It's important to them to say
Hmm.
yes, and they don't want to disrupt a business relationship or a familial relationship or a friendly relationship by
Hmm.
saying no. And they also don't think that that person is ever going to do them any wrong. So uh, why wouldn't they sign that agreement?
Famous last words.
Oh, yes,
Yeah, I I I I,
definitely.
I remember um, someone came to me and they said, "Hey, can you look over this contract? I drafted it." And uh, as it first started, I knew it was going to be like all downhill from there. So it was like individual name doing business as their LLC, and I'm like scratching my head, is like, oh man, I don't think this is getting any better. So I mean, I had to really tear it up, but I'm glad they asked me to look at it because it would have been really bad for them. But I think it just highlights the you put some statistical numbers to it, but yeah, people who try to do especially complex transactions, business transaction, and with written agreements or handshakes deals without advisement, it's really hard to know, especially because they don't know what they don't know, right? It says, okay, here's the piece of paper, just sign it. But once people like you and I get into it, there's a lot of we're trained to do the what ifs and to play things out based on our experience, and lots of times,
Absolutely.
in your case, 85% is like, no, we got to do this over, we got to change a bunch of stuff.
Right. Well, and sometimes it's okay to say, "Yeah, Shannon, that's great advice. I heard you. I understand everything you said. I'm going to take these risks because of this reason." That's We do those things in business all the time. There are many reasons for not always doing things in a risk-free way, but doing them just with the thought or just the suggestion. I think a lot of people don't realize that if you just say, "Hey, that term, can we make this reciprocal, or can we make payments over time, or do something a little bit different with this language?" That makes it more agreeable to them. Just yeah, just a little ask.
Right, right. Very good. And your next point now in your article, and I think it's actually fantastic. It's actually getting proper insurance coverage. Can you explain a little
Yes.
bit more about that context? Yeah.
Well, again, I think if I could figure out how to insure for breach of contract, I might be a very rich person. So that's not the that's not what we have here normally on a day-to-day basis. But for things like, yeah, for subcontractors, I actually once represented a subcontractor, and as it turned out, the agent had sold him a policy that didn't at all cover the very specific work that he was doing. So they were collecting a premium every year, but when a lawsuit came up over that particular part of the job, the insurance company says, "We don't cover that work." Well, it's in the name of the company you're insuring. So it
Oh,
oftentimes,
yeah.
yeah, policies are not. And they're not adequate for one reason or another. They may have exclusions that shouldn't be, or that may be worth exploring. I guess something creative, or a writer, or um, eh, maybe seeking indemnification and transferring of the risk to other parties. But yeah, making sure that there's insurance coverage either directly or indirectly is very important to the extent that you can. So, and yeah, understanding your policies and having a good agent who understands business, and not somebody who is just interested in collecting whatever their premium payments might be.
Yeah, I mean, you made
So,
all good points, and for me, as a business attorney, I always get a lot of questions like, I want to form an LLC or a corporation to protect my personal assets, especially kind of real estate investors. And what I usually tell them is like, yeah, if you can do it, do kind of a two-prong approach. Do insurance and form the LLC. Let's say it's LLC for real estate. And the reason why, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, even if you have the LLC, right, and you don't have insurance, there's a lawsuit filed against the LLC. The LLC still has to go find the attorney, has to go pay the attorney the retainer, still have to pay the cost of representation, right? So it's a lot of
Yes,
out of pocket. With
right.
with if you have a policy, then you can tender the claim to the insurance, assuming they cover it, right? And you kind of hands off. I mean, you still have to make some major decisions, but it's kind of hands off. The insurance company hires
Yes,
the attorney,
yes.
pays the settlement out of the policy limits.
Absolutely. And you raise an important point, which is that when you are being sued as a business owner, you can't represent yourself. Or if you're suing as a business owner, you can't represent yourself in court. You have to hire an attorney to do it, and that costs money. So if you're being sued and you have a policy of insurance that covers it, then you have, yeah, those fees are covered by the insurance policy. So you've got the two-pronged approach. You've got the attorney's fees and then the indemnification, the payment of the lawsuit. So, yeah, a lot of business owners, I think they think, okay, well, I'll just deal with it if I get sued, and they don't realize, well, you can't deal with it in your personal capacity, and you might think that that's a good idea for whatever reason, but you can't do that in the courts in California. A business owner has to be represented in litigation by an attorney. So, which is, yeah, the going to the
Mm-hmm.
next point about writing a
Mm-hmm.
letter is usually it's a good springboard to letting people know if you're intending to sue them in a business capacity, that that is it's going to require extraordinary expense on both sides. If you're a business owner, you can't sue without hiring an attorney to do that, and the attorney is not very likely to take that dispute on a contingent basis. Business disputes, unless they're
Mm-hmm.
intellectual property based, aren't typically done on a contingent basis. They're done on an hourly basis, and that gets very, very expensive. Um, I used to be a little more lukewarm about letter writing, and as time has gone on, I've realized that it's worth it. I think about 15% of people respond to the letters that I write, and they say sorry, or here's the money, or let's work this out, or there's something that's meaningful, that's positive. um, I would say about the same amount, 15%, will it just completely ignore me. I know they've received my letter, it's been
Mm-hmm.
sent certified mail, or I can see that in the email that they've read my email, um, but no response whatsoever. And the balance is some sort of meaningful dialogue. It may not be in agreement with what I've written, but almost always there's another lawyer that comes to the table, at which point then the parties can move forward with resolution. And it's great. Those 15% of the cases where uh, the money is paid, or the demand is fulfilled, are magical and fantastic, and they make me really happy.
Mm-hmm.
um, the 15% of the time where I get ignored, it's frustrating, but I think understood. But it's the remainder, though. I think that's really where the good work happens, because you have attorneys on both sides. I think there sort of has to be an agreement between attorneys who are maybe even potentially doing work that's covered by an attorney's fees provision, that they care more about the clients
Mm-hmm.
than they care about potentially ever recovering an attorney's fee award, and that they're there to,
Mm-hmm.
in good faith, resolve the differences between the clients. The best times are when the person on the other side is somebody who I already know. And again, in our smaller legal pond, that happens frequently,
Mm-hmm.
and it's great. It's very refreshing to say, look, I agree with you on this. I disagree with you on that. Let's figure out where we can work to resolve this expeditiously. Um, and yeah, it can be magical. And sometimes this happens, it may be that, in fact, it happened not that long ago, where kind of going into the next point of don't give up. I had I had a client who had several contacts, and efforts to try to resolve a real estate dispute, and was unable to. And finally, I got involved, and then the person on the other side um, ended up being represented by somebody I had a long-standing relationship with. And really, by the end of the week, the matter was resolved, because it had my client had just hung in there long enough, and wasn't discouraged, and didn't say, "All right, I've had enough of this,"
Mhm.
and spent that little bit of extra time and money to say, "Okay, this is worth that." And yeah, we were able to resolve it. Um, most people aren't going to be in that 15%. They're going to be in that 70%, where there's going to need to be further discussion. It's a controversial issue, otherwise they wouldn't have called me in the first place. So
Right.
I do
Do you
I
find the
think
letters? Um, do you find the letters, whatever direction they ultimately resolve, it kind of sets the tone for resolution, and so that is one of the benefits of writing the letter in itself.
I, I think there is a cathartic function of going through the letter writing process. It's helpful to organize, but I think it also helps to for people to feel better about their position. Um, there's
Mhm.
Being organized too, I think, is really helpful when you're laying something out for somebody. If as a lawyer to another lawyer, in litigation, it's always really helpful to have as much information available to me as I possibly can, and so that
Mhm.
organization is really important. Trying to stay ahead of it. But again, getting back to the relationships, that ends up being really everything. And sitting down and talking about the relationships
Mhm.
between the parties. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
nobody.
So,
I
kind of
once
going
ran
back to
across a
attorney's fees.
litigator. Hmm. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. For when we talk about attorney's fees, and for the listeners here, for the business owners, sometimes in contracts there's attorney's fees provisions where basically it says, hey, whoever the prevailing party is or the winning party can get their attorney's fees paid for, and what is it about? Not high percentage, like 90% of cases ultimately settle, and the parties have to pay their attorney's fees as part of the agreement. But for that other 10%, um, is to kind of make it more clear for these business owners listening. Does does the client have to pay the attorney, and then, if they win at trial, they get the money back, and then it gets paid back to the client, or does essentially the attorney take it on quasi contingency? It doesn't take maybe to take money for fees, but they're just hoping to collect on the other side on the attorney's fees provisions.
Right. There were lots of questions to unpack there. In um, in the in the case of an attorney's fees provision, where a party is entitled to fees, if they have to be the victor at the time of trial. So it's not just, hey, yeah, as you were saying, oftentimes it's paid as part of the agreement. So a case that settles is not going to be subject to an attorney's fees provision. Certainly, it's taken into account when a settlement is being made, but in order to recover those fees at the end of a favorable trial, the attorneys would have to go back and make a motion for attorney's fees, at which point it's only the reasonable attorney's fees that are awarded. Meaning, you could charge your client, and maybe legitimately charge your client $200,000 for really gnarly litigation, but only end up being able to get back a quarter of that. And on the flip side, you could end up in a situation where you pay the other side's attorney's fees, and if you're there
Mhm.
and you're not resolving the case and you let it go to trial, you may end up in a spot where you're paying not only the amount of money in controversy, but you're paying oftentimes a lot more in in the fees. I mean, you could have a $30,000 controversy where easily you could
Mhm.
spend $300,000 on fees, and I, I think that's where it's difficult. Is would the court say that's reasonable? I don't know. Maybe would the court say it's reasonable over 3-year period, 4-year period of protracted litigation with expensive, very educated attorneys, experienced attorneys, maybe. But that's why they should settle. Um, and yeah, and I let my clients know as a matter of course to never expect attorney's fees as part of your recovery, because the what it takes to go the distance is often not worth it. And I believe that and it may even be higher right now, but I believe it's something like 98% of the cases settle before the time of trial. So, uh, yeah, trying to be that 2% that goes to trial and recovers is a dangerous game indeed. So, thank you for boiling that down, and hopefully, I answered your questions.
Yeah, so like most
So,
attorney answers, it depends then.
exactly, exactly. And some insurance policies, I believe, do cover attorney's fees as well as part of as part of their uh, what they provide to the business owner. So that's also
Policy.
that's another
Yeah,
talk for another
yeah.
day.
I a couple of years ago, someone reached out to me. It was an insurance broker, but they sold contract litigation insurance. Have you come across this?
Contract litigation insurance. No, I don't think I know what that is.
Yeah, so I think if I recall correctly, it was coverage in case of breach of, I don't know if exactly breach of contract claims, but if there was a dispute in a contract that entered, then that would cover partly attorney's fees in it. So I thought it was an interesting proposition. I don't know if there was anything that kind of made out of it, but they
That's
shared it with me. I
interesting.
thought, oh well, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, yeah. So maybe I'll go back and look at it some more. Um, Fantastic. Hey, we're kind of over the hill on this great chat. Is there anything you wanted to add um, before we start closing this out here?
I guess just to, I would offer to think big picture. I know that it's difficult sometimes when feelings get hurt or relationships are become broken to uh, really get so bitter that you can't move past it. It's that's one of those situations that phrase, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. Um, it is so much better, I think, to deal with the issues at the front. Don't let them fester. Um, Hand it over to an attorney. Let that person help you. It will cost a lot less money in the beginning than it will if you let it lie. And try not to take it personally or um, let it affect you doing business moving forward. Have that be a learning experience and say, okay, this was the cost of me doing business, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. And that's I think again a good life lesson, maybe not just a professional recommendation.
Yeah, yeah, and I think most importantly, in terms of saving, right? I think time as well. especially for business owners? Like, where is their where is their most valuable time spent at? Right? Is it trying to deal with this litigation, or is it trying to go get more clients or more customers? Right?
Absolutely. Well, and that's an important point you raised, because in addition to the expense, it's having to sit for a deposition, having to respond to volumes of discovery, written discovery, and being asked questions that you think are irrelevant and invasive and all sorts of things. I mean, it's not just the money, it's the emotional expense that's associated with being involved in litigation.
All right, we have Shannon Lamb here, attorney extraordinaire, sharing her tips on how to avoid litigation, and even some if you're in it already. And so we are going to get into the rapid fire question section of our interview. So Shannon, just answer the first thing that comes into your head.
Uh-oh. Okay.
All right. Nothing embarrassing. It's just more. You'll get it. You'll get it. All right. So who do you look up to?
I look up to people who fend for themselves, who are willing to fight for what they believe, and for the things that matter to them. I also look up to,
Okay.
by the
All
way, my
right.
daughter, who
Um,
can negotiate
what's
like
the
nobody's
best?
business.
Oh, all right. Fantastic. Um, what is the best business book you've ever read?
That one is really difficult for me. I'm not. I'm not. I used to read books a lot, traditionally, and now I like to get very concentrated sources. So I might say, "Hey Dan, what good books have you read?" Like for example, I know I'm going to be reading Annie Duke's How to Decide very soon. But I love collaborating, and I do. I love asking people what they're doing in their business groups, or what they're seeing in their business, what sort of trends, and that sort of
Mm,
collaboration is really where I get most of my business information from.
all right. And I follow that too because I used to be a very relatively voracious reader, but a while back I realized I was reading all this stuff but wasn't really implementing all the things I was learning. So I what I started to do is actually started to read less and try to implement more.
I like that. See, there you go.
Right?
One less book I need to read.
Read less books with this one stupid trick. All right. What's the best business advice you've ever received?
To look for opportunity, to be aware of it, um, and to prepare with the idea that the opportunity might not originally or initially present itself, but it will be there uh, eventually. But yeah, to prepare.
All right. Um, if you can do one thing over again, what would it be?
I would go back and get my MBA when I got my law degree. I really, at the time, I don't think that I understood how important some of those concepts would be in what I do for a living. And I really do wish that I had more of that. To that end, I'm taking some executive legal education courses through Berkeley this summer to learn a bit more about blockchain and
Hmm.
cryptocurrency and other cool things. So and business as well.
Fantastic. Um, so, how much of your success would you attribute to just luck, and how much would you attribute to the hard work that you've put in?
Oh, you are asking the most difficult questions. I hope you never take my deposition. Um, Well, I certainly, I
Depends what you
feel
mean.
pretty
What is?
exactly, exactly. Well, certainly, I feel very fortunate to be born here in the United States and in California and Southern California. That's got to be dumb luck, right? Um, a- and I feel exceptionally lucky to practice in Orange County, where it's just one of the coolest places to be a lawyer. I believe. Um, Being a lawyer takes hard work, certainly, but I don't know if it's so much hard work as it is intention and
Hmm.
listening to what people need. There's usually a lot more that's involved in the discussion about yeah what people need, that's important to what I do. So it's yeah it's I think some of it is caring. It's definitely intention. It's definitely effort. That's not luck, but I don't know if it's sort of that standard achievement that you would think. I went to law school. I passed the bar. That was
Yeah.
tough. Um, Being a lawyer is tough. Being in the courtroom, listening to a lot of this anger from the judges all the way down is difficult. Um, I would like to
Great,
make it
actually, great,
less
great answer
difficult.
because
I think
this
that's what.
podcast, man, obviously making everyone's lives a little bit easier. And to your answer about being intentional, of course, our podcast here is called the Intentional Entrepreneur. So everything we do, we hope is with a certain particular outcome, and not just by stroke of luck. So thank you for your answer there. And then I actually have one rapid fire question and a follow up question on our topic. The last rapid fire question is, um, what's the biggest challenge you have in your business today?
It's getting any sort of quick resolution. It's getting the parties to understand, everybody to understand that there isn't an avenue to a resolution of a dispute that happens in a week if you file a lawsuit.
Mhm.
It is very rare that the outcome is that you file a lawsuit and you have resolution right away. Yeah, it's I think important to try to get it resolved as quickly as you can before that lawsuit gets filed.
Okay. Thank you again, Shannon Lamb, for your words of wisdom. And my final question, kind of going back to business litigation. So I form a lot of corporations. I form a lot of LLCs. There's a lot of push on transactional attorneys like myself as, hey, you got to maintain your corporate books. You got to do your annual minutes. You got to file those things with the state every year because there's alter ego issues. Now, from your perspective, someone who's on the front lines, who's litigated cases where these issues may or may not be important, can you tell us how it is important to do all those things to do all your annual minutes? How does that come in and bite you in the butt really bad, or is it something where like, okay, we can just do that later?
Well, it's never anything that you want to have to explain. You always want to make sure that everything is in place as it should be because you don't want to be distracted from the arguments. If your argument is that, hey, I supplied you 8 widgets and you did not pay me for 8 widgets, do you really want to be discussing why you didn't file your annual minutes? You certainly don't want to be spending money on lawyers to be arguing that. So it's much better not to be distracted from the point and having everything in place.
I never really thought about that, but that's a very good answer. Hey, thank you again, Shannon, for hanging out with us. Really good information about how to avoid litigation. Now, what's like your sweet spot? In terms of taking on clients, what like if you could wave a magic wand, like who would you want to work with all day long?
Somebody who has a pre-litigation need, somebody who's received a letter from a lawyer and is looking to respond to that or figure out what the next steps are, somebody who needs an advocate in mediation. I love mediation. I believe very strongly that that's where most of these disputes should be resolved. So anybody says, "Oh, I have mediation being demanded of me," or I would like to have somebody attend mediation. Those are the kind of clients that I like to represent.
Great. So we will put your contact information in the show notes. Um, and anyone who's listening to the show wants to reach out to Shannon for some help. Happy. I've referred clients to her, and so I can. And I've known her for, she said, 11 years now. So I can attest to her integrity in the practice of law. So thank you again for hanging out with us, and hopefully, we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so very much, Dan.